So, as a lot of you know, I live halfway. I live in Canberra and in a little valley called Goongerah in East Gippsland, and I commute every week between the two places. And where Goongerah is, it's about 100 kilometres of windy road that just winds through the forest. And it's extremely popular with motorcyclists. They love doing that stretch of road. And often I'm behind them and I give them plenty of berth. And if I'm in front of them, I pull over and let them go past so that they can be in their flow. And I was observing them the other day, the way they're going along, and then the camber, as the road turns, the camber of the road tilts, and they tip as they go around the corner. And then the camber sort of momentarily is flat, and then it tilts the other way. So they're momentarily upright, and then they tilt the other way. And they're doing that for 100 kilometres, going along, tilting, coming upright for a few seconds, tilting, coming upright for a few seconds, tilting, all the way down that road. And it's incredibly pleasant. They like doing it. That's why people go on that road who don't live in Goongerah. There's really no other reason to go on that road if you don't live in that tiny little valley. Because the two little towns at each end, there's a faster road that connects them. So the only reason to do this one is if you like doing the windy roads, or if you're visiting the forest. But I was just contemplating that process of being upright on the straights, tilting a little to one side when it's appropriate, coming up, tilting a little bit to the other side. And how that felt like a way of visualising the middle way teachings that we have in our tradition. When I first heard the middle way teachings, it was through things like the sutra that we chant on Friday mornings, setting in motion the wheel of Dharma. And the section of the sutra is, one part of it goes, "Monks, these two extremes ought not to be practiced by the one who has gone forth from the worldly life. What are the two? There is devotion to pursuing sense pleasures, which is degrading, common, the way of ordinary people, unworthy and unprofitable. And there is devotion to self-mortification, which is painful, unworthy and unprofitable. Avoiding both these extremes, the Tathagata has realised the middle way." And so I remember when I first heard that teaching, I thought, well, that seems pretty straightforward. Don't overly indulge too much, and don't be too sort of ascetic and rigid and strict and anti pleasures of life. Don't be too into the pleasures of life. Don't be sort of opposed to the pleasures of life. Or don't overly get attached to the needs of your body, and don't neglect the needs of your body. I thought, well, that seems fairly straightforward. How come there's whole books written about this? Which there are. There's huge, thick books on the middle way teachings. So part of me knew there's got to be a lot more to this than just some basic advice on how to live in a healthy way, in just the conventional sense of, get a bit of exercise, don't eat too much fat, make sure you get plenty of sleep. Even though that actually is, as it turns out, a very profound teaching, it can seem like it's just something pretty straightforward and superficial. So, what might be some of the subtleties around this teaching called the middle way or the middle path? And one way is to look at it a little bit philosophically. There's an idea of what you could call eternalism, that we exist in some permanent way, like maybe the idea of a soul or an essence that that always goes on, maybe exemplified in the idea of heaven and hell, that we particularly, specifically, as ourselves, never die. And Buddhism doesn't really adhere to that idea that we have this separate identity that just keeps on going. Doesn't really, not the way we think of it in the Buddhist tradition. So it's called eternalism. And then the other way would be sort of a nihilistic or nihilist way of viewing things, that we come from nothing, we're born, we live this life, and we die, and that's the end of the story. Nothing more to it than that. So the middle way is kind of exploring something in between. This idea that we have a kind of ego entity that always exists and always goes on, and the opposite view. No big deal, come from nothing, go back to nothing. And with that view, sometimes there's a sense like just have as much fun as you can for the short time you're here, kind of thing. It can be got a little bit of maybe a feeling of sarcasm, often is associated with that sort of view. But that's not very warm-hearted, so we don't hold that view either. So the sort of the middle way in between is this recognition that we, of what's called dependent origination, that we are profoundly intertwined with everything else. That we are profoundly intertwined with everything else. That what we actually are is everything else. In fact, everything else other than ourselves, because ourselves as an actual thing is an illusion. So we really are, in fact, the sun and the rain and the minerals and the trees and the animals. That we are, in fact, all of those things. And in that sense, we are eternal. In that sense, we never die. Because we were never born, it is just a continuation. There's just this continual movement, flowing on, and transformation that's occurring, rising up like a little wave on the ocean, a little peak of water on the ocean and flowing back down. Or sometimes we talk about it as a drop of water falling from a waterfall and going back into the river. So there's no real birth and death. There's just a temporary constellation of things which we give a name to, such as Neti. So there's this beautiful way down the middle where I've never been born and I'm never going to die is one aspect of it, and not forgetting that at the same time I do appear in this particular way, and I was born on a particular date, and I will die on a particular date. And we hold those two together. This is why I like the image of being on the motorbike. You're just tilting as appropriate, moment by moment. Right now, important to think about what we think of as form. So form and emptiness is the sort of language we often use in Zen. Sometimes we tip a little towards form because that's what's needed. If you trip, in that moment, the most important thing is to get your hands to hit the pavement so your face doesn't hit the pavement. And so in that moment, you are not thinking about emptiness. You're not thinking about, in that moment, everything's interconnected and I am the pavement. That probably wouldn't be a good use of our mind in that moment. In that moment, it's like pavement and face, hands. That's the most important thing. That's like one tilt. And then the other tilt happens. Particularly, this is where I love this other tilt. If I'm dealing with a difficulty and it just starts to feel slightly overwhelming, like how am I going to manage this difficulty? In that moment when it's starting to feel like too concrete, too real, I can kind of create a spaciousness We are all in this together. Me as a separate entity is not really a thing. The problem is not a separate thing. Problem's not actually a thing. It's just my idea. It's not nothing, but it's not as something as it feels in this moment. And I can become much more spacious. Breathe. And then respond appropriately. Just tilting. A little one way, a little other as needed. And then when the road is just straight, we just be upright, holding these two views, what we call the two truths, holding them together. Nothing exists as it appears, but it does appear, and its appearance has an impact on us. So we want to respect the appearance, but not believe the appearance. That'd be another way of saying it. And it's just a simple example that I was listening to a Dharma talk the other day, as some examples of this interdependence of all things that I thought was rather lovely. That there is a star that's shining, but the light emanating from that star isn't at all visible in any way until an object such as a planet intercepts with that vibration. And when it intercepts with that vibration, suddenly it's illuminated. But even then, it's only illuminated if there's something to see the illumination. So there's the planet, there's the sun, there's the planet, and there's the I, which is what happened with the Buddha on the morning of his awakening, seeing the morning star. He looked up. The planet Venus, saw it capturing the light of the sun, and his eyes seeing it in that moment. He saw the complete interdependence of all things. And he said, I, along with all beings, realize Buddha nature, or the true way. So I'm going to read a couple of things. If you really wanted to delve into the teachings on the Middle Way and wanted to read something very difficult, I would recommend The Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, which is Nagarjuna's writing, and this is the translation and commentary by J. Garfield. He's a Tibetan practitioner and a Western philosopher. It's a very difficult read, but if you have the patience for it, especially if you want to do it with somebody else, it really can deepen. We can always deepen our understanding of how profound our assumptions about things being in existence, how profound our habit of mind is about that, and helps. All of Nagarjuna's writings are about helping us to unpack and see that every concept that we have is useful, it is conventionally it serves a function, but it's not actually true. It's not actually real. So just to give you a little flavour of the sorts of things, and I'll read just a little bit of it. The central topic of the text, this text, is emptiness, the Buddhist technical term for the lack of independent existence, inherent existence, or essence in things. Nagarjuna relentlessly analyzes phenomena or processes that appear to exist independently and argues that they cannot so exist, and yet, though lacking the inherent existence imputed to them, either by naive common sense or by sophisticated realistic philosophical theory, these phenomena are non-existent. They are, he argues, conventionally real. This dual thesis of the conventional reality of phenomena, together with their lack of inherent existence, depends upon the complex doctrine of the two truths or two realities, a conventional or nominal truth and an ultimate truth, and upon a subtle and surprising doctrine regarding their relation. It is, in fact, this sophisticated development of the doctrine of the two truths as a vehicle for understanding Buddhist metaphysics and epistemology that is Nagarjuna's great philosophical contribution. And then a little further on. What counts as real depends precisely on our conventions. For Nagarjuna and his followers, this point is connected deeply and directly with the emptiness of phenomena. That is, for instance, that a Madhyamaka philosopher says of a table that it is empty. That assertion by itself is incomplete. It invites the question, empty of what? So this is this conversation about a table. But I want to point out that the table is just a good example, and then we can talk about how you can apply this thinking to the many things that actually trip us up and catch us up and cause us to suffer and cause us to make others suffer. So a table is empty, but empty of what? And the answer is empty of inherent existence or self-nature, or in more Western terms, essence. Now, to say that the table is empty is hence simply to say that it lacks essence, and importantly, not to say that it is completely non-existent. To say that it lacks essence, the Madhyamaka philosopher will explain, is to say, as the Tibetans like to put it, that it does not exist from its own side, that its existence as the object that it is, as a table, depends not on it, nor on any purely non-relational characteristics, but depends as well on us. That is, if our culture had not evolved this manner of furniture, what appears to us to be obviously a unitary object might instead be correctly described as 5 objects. 4 quite useful sticks, absurdly surmounted by a pointless slab of stickwood waiting to be carved. Or we would have no reason to indicate this particular temporary arrangement of this matter as an object at all, as opposed to a brief intersection of the histories of some trees. It is also to say that the table depends for its existence on its parts, on its causes, on its material, and so forth. Apart from these, there is no table. The table, we might say, is a purely arbitrary slice of space-time chosen by us as the referent of a single name, and not an entity demanding on its own recognition and a philosophical analysis to reveal its essence. That dependent characteristic is precisely what it lacks. That's just a little flavour of what Nagarjuna examines here. Here is the example of a table. But we map all sorts of concepts onto things and hold them to be true and real and often very static. And often we use fairly emotionally neutral things like a table as an example. But that's because sometimes if you talk about things that have a strong emotional charge, it's hard for people to concentrate. But it's not to say that this teaching doesn't map onto concepts such as a just war, or a terrorist, or elderly people, or women, or any number of things, any number of concepts that we use that people often use with quite a rigid, fixed sense of what it is. This is what this thing is, and I have an opinion about it. We do it all the time. We have opinions about things. I think amplified probably most powerfully in politics, but all other places as well. You know, in our workforce, we might have very strong opinions about bosses, we might have strong opinions about workers, We might have strong opinions about things like democracy, state capitalism, free market capitalism. All of these things don't actually exist as fixed things. They don't not exist at all, as Nagarjuna said, but they don't exist as we think they do. And if we can be like on the motorbike, not tilting fully too hard one way, if we do that, we're just going to fall off. Not tilting far too far the other way. Just what's appropriate in this moment. It's appropriate in this moment. And a lot of the time, when the road is straight, we can just be upright, holding the two equally. Always holding these two views. It is and it isn't. It's sort of true and it sort of isn't true. And it doesn't make us wishy-washy. Sometimes people think, well, it'll make you wishy-washy if you hold that view, but actually it doesn't at all. It's actually very powerful, and powerful in the sense that you have energy and vitality because you are functioning in accord with reality rather than trying to twist reality into your opinion. And we try to twist reality to fit our template, and our templates are always terribly simplified compared to the real world. Whatever the real world is, it's completely beyond our comprehension. So we burn up a lot of energy trying to force the world into narrow definitions, and people fight each other over them and speak ill of each other over them. And people also get more rigid about things like certain things like money or status, and then they'll harm other people over those things as well. So this teaching totally influences the way we function in the world. And I think it's really lovely to think that we can move through the world like on a motorbike, just tilting appropriately as needed, being of benefit because we have an ethical framework that all of our teachings are through this ethical framework of wanting to be of benefit and doing as least harm as we can. Least harm to ourselves, least harm to others. I'd like to read a koan that touches on this point. There's two koans that go together, so I'll read them both. Case 29, Tao Su's, it goes along with it, in the Blue Cliff record. A monk asked Tao Su, the conflagration at the end of the eon sweeps through and the universe is totally destroyed. I wonder, is this one destroyed or not? Su said, it is destroyed. The monk said, if so, then this goes along with it? Su said, it goes along with it. So it's a sort of an expression of, we are all in this together. We are completely all in this together. And then the same case comes up, spoken about in a different way. Later, a monk was asked, who asked Master of the Mountain, Shui, the conflagration at the end of the eon sweeps through and the universe is totally destroyed. I wonder, is this one destroyed or not? The Master of the Mountain said, it's not destroyed. The monk said, why isn't it destroyed? The Master said, because it's the same as the universe. It is the same as the universe. Both it's destroyed and it's not destroyed obstruct people fatally. So we don't want to get caught in eternalism or nihilism. We don't want to get caught in it totally is or it totally isn't. Things are and they aren't. It's actually incredibly joyful to function that way. Life becomes much easier. It becomes much easier when we feel the truth of it, when we really feel it in our bodies. We feel it in our bones, not just with our foreheads, not just here. If you think about it that way, it's not going to work very well. It'll be awkward. But if you sit in Zazen, you go for walks and you contemplate this teaching, do some reading, go for a walk, talk about it with somebody, discuss it with the teacher, start to feel like, oh yeah, I can see that now. I can see that a bit. We can see it more and more and more and more until we start to function that way. We just naturally, like on the motorbike, we just tip a bit this way. Oh, tip a bit that way. Oh, no need to tip. Just go straight ahead. We don't grab, we don't get caught, we just respond. Everything is in flux. It's another way of talking about this teaching. Everything is just in flux. You can't actually grab anything. It's just constant movement. There's no real edge to anything. There's no edge. It just seems to be edges. But there's no real edge. And when you do that, you just can move through life. Oh, somebody needs a bit of support here. Oh, nobody needs support. Great. I'm just going to chill out. Oh, somebody needs support. I'm going to do something over here. Oh, nobody needs support. I'm going to watch a movie. Somebody needs support. We just go like that through our whole life. It just doesn't stop. Just doesn't stop. Just goes like that. And it's a beautiful way to live. So I'd encourage you to examine this teaching, the middle way teaching. All right. I'll stop there and see if anyone would like to comment or ask a question in the Zendo or online. Nobody wants to ask anything or share anything. You don't have to. Francis.
Oh, the silence was getting to me. It's more just a comment that when I think, our brains like to simplify things because then it's easy to sort of understand, and when you do try to get to the nutshell truth of something, it's kind of almost painful on the brain when I think about it.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Can you say a little bit more about when you try to get to the...
Like if you try to sort of understand something, but to simplify it so that you can understand it, it's like the brain actually starts sort of hurting because you can't.
Yeah.
You kind of trying to clutch at air or
yeah.
something that doesn't exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I think that comes from this teaching actually, especially the teaching on interdependence of all things, is we realise that we can't understand anything actually. Not really. We can do an approximation. And what I find I often do is I say to myself, I can't understand what's happening now. I'll make a temporary hypothesis, a functional hypothesis, so I can work out what to do, but I don't forget that that's all it is. It's just a very rough kind of hypothesis about something. A common example would be somebody speaks to you in a certain way that feels a little bit cryptic and confusing. You don't understand what they meant or why they said that. Most people will come up with a theory. Oh, they said that because, and they'll come up with a theory. And that's fine, we all do that, but it becomes a problem when we think our theory is right. That's when it becomes a problem. But if we can be quite relaxed with, I don't really know. I'm going to come up with some kind of temporary thing because I need to respond, let's say, if often we don't need to respond. we make a lot of trouble for ourselves by responding more than we need to at times. But if we do need to respond, we can have a kind of humility in our mind. We don't really know why that thing happened. Because you're right, our brain will really start to hurt if we try and figure it out. So it's good to be comfortable with not really knowing. And whatever we say is just an approximation. It's always, absolutely always without an exception just an approximation of reality. Reality is completely beyond our comprehension. And this is another very important teaching and really beneficial when you feel it in your bones, that you can move through the world with, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just responding as best as I can. That's it. And all of us are muddling along that way. Like, all of us are muddling along. Some doing more harm, some doing less harm, some being of more benefit, some being of less benefit. But all of us are muddling along. Yeah. Does that help? Yes. Nicole, is that right? Yeah.
So you mentioned before about the motorcyclist and the
Yep.
wave, and that's great, and it made such sense. And then you said pretty much we should be there for others, and when we're not there for others, we can just have our free time, like meditate or watch TV or whatever, and then when we're there for others, you're kind of leaning, and I understand that, but shouldn't we be there for ourselves?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I appreciate what you're saying in regards to television, like that that sort of comment you made, but where does that line sort of come, that being there for ourselves as well, isn't that the most important in some ways?
Yeah.
Being there for others, but just having that balance, I suppose, is
Yeah.
is that what you meant?
Yeah. Like, well, I'll respond to what you're saying. We care for ourselves because we are one of the others. Like, we are just one of everybody. We're part of it. It's not the others and us. Although on this is two truths teaching, on a certain basic way, it's more important. It makes sense for me to make sure that I eat well. It'd be silly for someone else to have to put all that effort in. So we do have, just in a conventional sense, a responsibility to look after ourselves more than other people having to be responsible for us. But it's good to get to the point in your life where you're caring for yourself so that you can be of benefit to others. It's got a less. I mean, it's nice to care for yourself anyway. It's kind of enjoyable. But there's this beautiful sense of like, yes, I need to look after myself so I can continue to care for my family or care for my environment or whatever we might be doing. It's got a much softer feel in terms of ego identification. But we are just equally one of the others, if you know what I mean. So yes, we're included. We're included. When the universe is destroyed at the end of the eon, do we go along with it as well? Yes, we do. We're included. Everybody suffers. Everybody struggles. Everybody's muddling along, including us. So we have to, look after ourselves. Yeah, it's a good comment, because some people get caught up with looking after others and neglect themselves. And then you're not actually being of benefit. You're not really being as of much benefit, because it's a little tainted. There's something a little off about that if we don't care for ourselves. Yeah, like mothers with children. If a mother or a father needs to make sure that they're looking after their own needs too. Physical needs, but their emotional needs, their intellectual needs. Often parents don't get to care for their intellectual needs or their creative needs, and it's good if they can find a way. I feel like I did that. Like, I was doing koan study, like breastfeeding babies. I didn't let children stop me practicing, and I think there was a sense of that's actually beneficial to them in the long run. That their mother's happy and engaged in what inspires her. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, yep, go ahead.
I just would like to thank you very much for this talk. It's just a great reminder of the balance we should adhere to.
Yeah.
And it has so many aspects, like the this analogy with the motorcycle can be applied in so many aspects of our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, and relative and absolute relationships, and kind of dreaming and being productive. It's just everywhere, and relationships with other people. Just like it's really profound teaching. Yeah, I feel like. Yeah.
All right, so we are going to